Delighted to welcome back into studio Douglas Kruger, who's the author this time of Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? 50 Ways the Rich Think Differently. Well, welcome to you, Douglas.
Lovely to be back. Thanks so much, Tamara.
Well, absolute pleasure. Now, it's a very interesting book. Do you think we need to give this to our new mayor, Hannah?
Absolutely. And what we should do, of course, is for PR's sake, just get a photo of him posing with it.
Yes.
Yeah, that serves my purposes.
I'm going to leave that to you, actually. But in fact, what does keep people poor? What do you think? Apart from obviously, life is very difficult when you are dirt poor, as they say.
Absolutely.
So.
And in fact, the book is written in a very gentle way, and it helps people and it takes you by the hand through the whole process. But it's interesting that you started with the sort of political angle, because the research shows that in Africa, the number one thing keeping African people poor is their own governments. There was a feature on, I think it was CNBC Africa the other day, where they said 6 of the 10 most corrupt countries on earth are in sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the books that I read while researching this topic, what genuinely keeps us poor in Southern Africa, the chapter title was rather devastatingly Thugs in Power. And they say, really, that is the number one thing. So the opening point for my book is to say, you must divorce your wealth expectations from anything to do with your government.
Oi.
Yeah.
I do understand that people do tend to rely on that welfare state, that handout, and particularly if you are poor and and are not thinking differently, it's easy to sort of sit there with your handout. And this doesn't only happen here, let me tell you, because the welfare state in England, it's all over the world, in a lot of countries, and people do become dependent, but it does mean they're never going to get rich.
Yeah, and of course it's done from a place of kindness, and we certainly do need to take care of people who are in situations, people who are orphans or whatever the case might be. But you're precisely right. There does create dependency, and that becomes the problem. Now, very interesting, when you look at socialist countries, we're often given the idea of places like, say, Sweden as a very successful example of a socialist country. Yes, and it is. But there's a story behind the scenes that we're not often told. Sweden, up until the 1970s, and for the century prior, went through their own golden era, which was a very much of a capitalist free market system. And under that, Swedes became per capita the third wealthiest people on earth. And then they instituted socialism, after which point they immediately dropped to behind 30th place globally per capita. So in a place like Sweden, yes, it is sustainable because of the prosperity that came before it. When you try systems like that in Venezuela, the country just goes down the toilet.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting, but when you look at the Swedes, the Norwegians, if they didn't plan ahead, they starved. In evolutionary terms, if they didn't plan ahead to get them through the winter, so they actually evolved in ways that perhaps are different to if you live in the sunshine and you can pick an apple off a tree.
Yes, of course, and every area geographically has its own realities, which is why I've tried to be as specific in this one as I can. Yes. It really is. They are global wealth principles, but they're angled toward people specifically living in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah. Okay. Is this another Rich Dad, Poor Dad type of book?
Oh, absolutely not. I do reference him. But one of the things that I say, and I think it's a fabulous book, but it does have its limitations. It almost starts with the idea, so take your money and... And I think that's one step too far. A lot of people would read a book like that and say, well, hang on, you've missed a step, which is, how do I get the money in the first place? And in fact, in a lot of my surveys on wealth and prosperity literature, I find they suffer from the problem of being a one-solution proposal. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad, by way of an example, is very much about using property, selling property to become wealthy. And a lot of the other books are about how to save to become wealthy. Tony Robbins wrote an excellent one that is really about how to invest to become wealthy. But again, it's a single proposal in each case, and they go into great depth with their one idea. But I fear that if that doesn't work for you, you're left high and dry. So what I've gone for is 50 different ways that look at the grand spectrum of wealth, whether you are perhaps even a relatively prosperous business owner in Santon looking to go to the next level of prosperity, or whether you're looking to get out of a township.
Yeah. Okay. You list, in fact, all your top 50 tips, if you like, come in the second part of the book. And leading up to that, you really look at our mindset, because so often, if you think poor, you never get away from that thinking that I can't afford this and I can't do this.
And it is fundamentally about thinking. It really is. And I'll just give you two simple little examples, and they're quite philosophical, but they're fascinating to ponder. Take the example of self-made multi-millionaires. In a surprising number of cases, these are men and women who have become wealthy and then gone bankrupt and bounced back again multiple times over. Now, at the point in time where they were bankrupt, these individuals did not think of themselves as poor. They thought of themselves as wealthy, successful entrepreneurs who temporarily didn't have any money.
It's all about the way you think,
And I'll give you another one that's perhaps closer to home, and it's a controversial one, but think carefully about the way this is phrased. In post-colonial countries all around the world, we have one of two choices for how to look at ourselves, the narrative that we sell ourselves. Now, in Southeast Asian countries, the people typically believe that they are victors over the system that came before. Uniquely in Southern Africa, we tend to believe we are victims of the system that came before. Now, here's the fascinating part. Both views are technically correct. You can justify either one, and you are right in whichever one you choose. But one of them is useful and will lead to prosperity, and the other will keep you in a victimhood mindset. So it really is a choice, and you can justify it one way or the other, but one is useful to you and one is not.
Yeah. In terms of where we go, taking ownership of your own wealth potential, I like the idea of taking ownership, but so often we hear about compound interest. And in fact, somewhere in the book it says wheelchair wealth.
Yes.
That by the compound interest is a fantastic thing.
Over huge amounts of time.
It's a great secret.
Yeah.
But you do end up with a lot of money at the very end. And there's a lady who cleaned house her whole life, but lived within or under her means, and in fact had a tax problem.
Ended up with a tax problem in her 70s.
Yes.
But that's too late to have a tax problem. You really, that is too long a period of time. So the book is replete with what I call yes buts. I think a lot of the information we're given about how to become wealthy is almost too simplistic. The idea of saving will make you wealthy. It's a yes but. And I'll very quickly give you 3 yes buts. So the first one is saving. The people who genuinely become multimillionaires do not become multimillionaires by means of saving. They use
do that later.
Yes, they do that later. They use more radical, quick wealth creation mechanisms like starting their own business, selling a product, whatever the case might be, and then they start to save. So it is a yes, but we should save, but it's not going to make you rich. The second one is perhaps even more surprising. Formal education is a yes, but. Almost guaranteed it will lift you out of poverty, but it will not make you rich in and of itself. Other human attributes are required beyond that point. So education is massively important for South Africa in terms of getting people out of poverty, but it does not make you rich in and of itself. And in fact, a huge number of tycoons and very wealthy people have not finished matric, do not have varsity degrees, and so on. And the third one, and this is perhaps the most radical idea, hard work. You can work incredibly hard your entire life and still die poor. So it's not that you shouldn't work hard, it's a yes but. It's basically saying if you don't aim your boat in the right direction, you can row as hard as you want and it's not going to get you to the right destination.
Yeah, so you've got to work clever.
Exactly that, and that's what I've tried to do with the book. I've tried to show where the traps are in terms of how people orient their work and their earnings, and where the levers are that get you exponentially better results.
Yeah. In terms of what the rich have in common, obviously there are various people like Donald Trump who inherited a lot of money, and then we look at Herman Mashaba, who actually was born poor and has raised himself up. What has Herman got that a lot of people don't, in that he has got himself out of that situation?
Interestingly, a lot of in fact, the majority of the world's self-made millionaires and billionaires are, in fact, or rather, the majority of the world's millionaires and billionaires are self-made. When you actually look at the stats and the numbers, there are far fewer people who have inherited large fortunes
Yes.
than there are first-generation millionaires and billionaires globally. So it is certainly something that it's more common that people work their way there than that they inherit, surprisingly enough. I list some of the characteristics of people like this, and some of them are very straightforward and obvious. Things like they are hard-driving people. They are always negotiating for their own interests. They are always striving for the next thing. And some are a little bit less obvious. For example, most self-made millionaires and almost all self-made billionaires play poker. Don't know why.
Oh, really?
It seems to be the case, yeah. And what it hints at is that these are people who love strategy. They are people who like to unemotionally look at a system and say, where are the levers? What can I do with the board in front of me? They also tend to keep their strategy to themselves. They are not big on giving away their own game plan, so they'll tend to keep it to themselves and surprise people at every turn. They are also collectors of numbers, and this is one that I found quite fascinating. Now, the numbers can be absolutely anything. The most obvious example is they love to watch the numbers in their bank account rise, but that's not the only thing.
Don't we all?
Well, yeah, that's not something I would complain about. But in fact, it can be anything. It might be numbers of accolades achieved, or numbers of businesses started, or numbers of countries in which they've done business. They are people who are fascinated by growing numbers of one form or another.
Oh, how interesting. How interesting. I do also, we're going to go into traffic in a moment, but I also do like the fact that you advise people to read books.
Absolutely.
And to me, that it just grows the mind,
Yes.
and it is just all important. But what sort of books?
I've believed it all of my life, and also in my survey on the existing wealth literature, it was the one theme that came out above everything else, which was read all the time.
Really?
Now, the fascinating thing is it doesn't matter what you read. You just need to be the type of person who reads.
And are you saying then that Richard Branson is the type of person who reads, or not really?
Can't say that I know him personally, but I would assume yes.
Yes.
If you look at Elon Musk, our own hero,
Of
he reckons he reads about 3 to 4 books per week. Now, I certainly can't keep up with that.
Yes, but you see, so do I.
Yeah. Well, I listen
Elon
to
Musk.
audiobooks to try and get the numbers up there. But absolutely, and it often is a case of reading things that are very disparate in nature. So these are people who tend to read business books on one hand, but say an Asterix comic book on the other hand. And it's the intersection of strange ideas and different patterns of thinking that actually seems to be incredibly valuable.
Gets those synapses sparking.
And a similar argument is I say we should be talking about money around the dinner table. And I make the point that it doesn't matter if you have the right information. Weirdly enough, the scenarios change all the time. So it's not about a family having the correct answers. It's about being the kind of family who debates this sort of thing.
You see, I do remember reading a book about the Kennedys, and look, I mean, wonderful family, disastrous family, whichever way you want to look at them. But they were always, as children, told to bring a subject to the dinner
Yes.
table. And they all sat there and were interesting.
Yeah.
And interested.
And it makes us agile with these concepts, and it also takes the shame out of it. Because interestingly, and particularly in families of faith, there is a lot of shame and a lot of negativity attached to wealth and prosperity. And we need to be talking about these things. You can't aspire to wealth if you don't fundamentally believe in it.
Yeah, very interesting. Stay where you are. If you've just tuned in, I'm chatting to Douglas Kruger, who's the author of Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? 50 Ways the Rich Think Differently. Well, Douglas, let's just, in terms of, because you did say that some people can work really hard their whole lives and actually still end up dying poor.
Yeah.
What is that? Because there is that saying, the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yes.
But in terms of the sort of ratio of hours worked equaling the coins earned, should we be looking at that more thoroughly?
In fact, I think that really is the heart soul of this book and the entire philosophy. And it boils down to a simple phrase, which is raise the value of what you do. And the idea there is we have limited hours in which we can work. And one of the surest paths to stay on the financial track that you're on, and or, in fact, to get caught in generational cycles of poverty, is to work for a boss for a set number of hours. You are really putting all of your eggs in one basket and relying on someone else to uplift your life, and their first interests are not yours. Now, of course, there are better and worse jobs across the spectrum, but in almost no cases do you get millionaires and billionaires working a job. So wealth really doesn't come from a classical traditional employment. Yeah. And the idea there is to look at how to, exactly that word you used, the ratio between hours worked and coins earned. How do you break that ratio and free yourself from that? How do you multiply your value per hour? And I'll give you my all-time favorite example of the person who got away with this one. There was a guy who worked 1 hour a day for 50 years and is now listed by Forbes as the third highest posthumous earner, third wealthiest dead guy, after Elvis and Michael Jackson.
No.
And that is Charles M. Schulz, the author of the comic strip Peanuts.
Heavens!
His working day, he would wake up, have a donut, drink a cup of coffee, answer some mail, spend an hour drawing a 4-panel comic strip, and that was it.
It's the donut that did him in.
It's the donut that did him in. 50 years of doing that and selling it in syndicated form to newspapers around the world.
Yes.
And in each case, each one of those newspapers pays something back to him. And then there's the merchandising and the book sales and so on and so forth over a period of 50 years. Third highest posthumous earner in the world, according to Forbes. He worked an hour a day.
I wonder whether Zapiro knows this. Shall we share it? Shall we share it? I'll give him a ring. How fascinating, because that is absolutely all important, isn't it?
Yes.
And if you can get, I suppose, the secret is if you can employ other people and you're earning off them, then you're on
I
the
look at
road,
10 different ways to raise your value. So one of them, for example, is what Charles Schulz did, which is syndication, where you make once and sell multiple times. Okay. And if it's an intangible thing, in other words, you don't have to produce a car, you don't have to make a lunchbox. If it's something that is digital or that can be reprinted, like music, for example, you make it once and you sell it multiple times over. That's one way to raise your value. But there are other ways as well. You can become the boss of an organization or the head of a division. Now, that's a reasonably slow way of raising your value, but it does work. Getting additional education, say an extra degree or an MBA, that's another slow way of doing it, but it does work. It raises your value a little as you go along. One of what I found to be the faster ways of doing it is to become an icon or an expert in your industry. And I always love using the example of Nigella Lawson for multiple reasons. My wife and I both watch the show, but for completely divergent reasons. If you think about the number of people who know how to cook to a greater or lesser degree, I mean, there must be hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people who are technically more qualified as chefs than Nigella Lawson.
Of course.
So the question is, why is she out-earning them? And you look at someone like a Jeremy Clarkson in the car world. How many hundreds of thousands of motoring journalists are there around the world? So why was he earning not just double, not just tenfold as much, but often, as much as 100-fold times more than the people around him?
But why do you think they earn more?
Well, because they have positioned themselves as personalities and essentially as industry celebrities.
Yes.
And that makes the world of difference. There is great equity in being the big name in your industry. You simply get paid more for the same work because of your iconic status. So that's another one of the 10 ways that I list to actually raise the value of what you do.
We're going to come back to those because we're going straight into news headline. I'm chatting this morning to Douglas Kruger, who's the author of a book called Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? And we've covered a lot of things that one might do when we look at those role models of people who have started off with nothing and actually got themselves out of whatever, whether it's middle-class poverty, whether it's coming out of the middle of a township, that they have managed to better themselves financially. And Douglas, in terms of, if we look at South Africa as a whole, in terms of how we treat entrepreneurs and in terms of how we look at making money as entrepreneurs, we don't seem to be doing that well, and yet I always thought that we were very entrepreneurial by nature.
Yes, and worryingly, the stats actually don't bear that out. When you read anything about the solutions to poverty in sub-Saharan Africa, generally it boils down to two things, and that is, the first is the obvious one, which is education, and the second one is entrepreneurship. But now, uniquely in South Africa, as compared to the rest of the nations in Southern Africa, our youth do not believe in entrepreneurship. And that's not an opinion, it's a measurable number. Apparently, something like 65% of our youth believe that entrepreneurship is, on the one hand, too difficult, and on the other hand, not sufficiently rewarding. Now, I would say I'm willing to agree with that in the sense that it is too difficult here because we make it too difficult here. And I think that is a major problem in South Africa. We need to be encouraging entrepreneurs, having more incubators, and to a large extent getting out of their way. The amount of red tape and difficulty for young entrepreneurs and small business owners is still staggering. It really is an uphill mountain to climb. Now, on the other side of that coin, there is some good news if you're willing to tell yourself a different story. The fact that it's so difficult makes it a barrier to entry for so many people that if you're willing to do it, you have an advantage.
You do.
Yeah. So I've
looking at it.
This book is written rather than sort of a trying to, talk about it on a big socio-economic level. I'm going, for you, the reader, how do I help you? And I basically said, if you have the courage and the bravery to think differently to the people around you, and it is different because 65% of our youth do not believe in entrepreneurship. If you do, you have a distinct advantage. Now, I'm willing and very open to admit that that's going to be hard work, but it's hard work initially, and it sets you on a different track to everyone else after the fact, because you can take the, in inverted commas, easier route of traditional employment, work hard your entire life and remain poor, or you can put in exponential amounts of work now and retire in a very, very different way. Basically, I want to graduate people to problems that wear Armani.
Okay. Instead of having wheelchair wealth as somebody did.
Or in fact never breaking even in their lifetime, which is even worse.
No, it is worse. In terms of the way we view people with wealth here, now if you, I'm not entirely convinced that we look at people with wealth in the right way, because if you look at somebody with the Ferrari in America, that's aspirational. If you look at them, I know how the British view it.
It's the difference between one day I'll be in one of those versus one day I'll have that guy out of that.
Yes. And how does that then, that attitude roll out in South Africa or Southern Africa?
I think you did right there. In the United States, they tend to be more open to aspiration, whereas in places like the UK, it's almost sort of frowned upon to some degree.
It's flashy, isn't it?
Yes. We're a bit of a mixed bag in that sense. We have equal degrees of people desperately wanting to uplift themselves and become wealthy, and issues of shame and guilt and so on around wealth, to the point where we even think wealthy people are evil, flat out evil, without qualification. And it's interesting because we put them into this amorphous blob called the rich, with capital letters. And what we then do is we fail to distinguish between them as individuals. You know, some of these people have inherited, some have started their own business.
Well, talk to us about Alan Gray.
Yes, absolutely. One of our most giving philanthropists in the nation. And in fact, what I do is I actually go through some of the, the people who are called capitalist pigs and less flattering things than that as well. And I give the stats on how many of them give in the order of millions to charities, and how their charitable work has helped people around the world and so on. And South Africans, particularly wealthy South Africans, are very, very good at that.
Yeah. Bill Gates.
Yes, absolutely.
As well.
There's an entire list of names in the book, and I mean, as you pointed out, some strong South African ones there as well.
Yes.
But the opening story in this book is exactly that, the reaction to wealthy people. And it's a true story where I saw the aftermath of an accident between a Ferrari and a Golf. And being a car lover, I put something on social media about this hymn to the mighty fallen, this beautiful Ferrari. And the degree of hatred aimed at the Ferrari driver afterwards genuinely caught me by surprise. I mean, the people stopped just short of calling him a child molester. No. And they knew nothing about him, and I knew nothing about him. We don't know what happened in that scenario, but he was presumed guilty by virtue of wealth. And it's interesting. And particularly, as I said earlier, among families of faith, we struggle with issues around, can you aspire to wealth, or should you feel guilty and ashamed about it?
Yeah.
And of course, the most corrupted verse of all time is the biblical verse that says, money is the root of all evil. Now, most people today know that the original, or believe, the original says the love of money is the root of all evil. But there's another correction to be made there, because it doesn't end with of all evil. The actual verse says, for the love of money is the root of many kinds of evil. Now that's a far cry from what's been handed to us as a glib little statement that money is the root of everything that can possibly go wrong.
Oh, that's a very interesting expose there. Just talk to us a bit, because there is in the book the escape from Khayelitsha. Now, there may be people who love living in Khayelitsha, but if you, with your background and your education, suddenly start living in Khayelitsha,
could you get out?
Could you get out?
Okay,
would you be able to, from that?
Get yourself to a different level. This is an interesting thought experiment, and strangely enough, it's actually not aimed at people in Khayelitsha. It's aimed at people living, say, in the middle class in South Africa, and just to point out how levels of thinking work when it comes to wealth. So the thought exercise goes like this. As a South African who is, say, driving a car, has a laptop, an iPhone, whatever the case might be, you're at that kind of functional level of wealth. If you drive past a township like Khayelitsha, if I had to strip you of your toys, your laptop, your phone, everything that you use, but you retained your level of thinking, and I put you into a community like that, the question becomes, could you get yourself back out to the level at which you lived previously? And I ask audiences this when I do this presentation, and the consensus generally among an audience is, well, yes, I probably could. With my education and so on, I could get back to where I am today. Then I pose the more grueling question, which is, I say, all right, if you accept that, then what if I transposed a self-made multi-billionaire into your world? Could he or she get back to where they are? Because if we accept that the answer to that is yes, then the difference between where we are today and where someone like an Elon Musk or a self-made millionaire is a difference in thinking. There are answers available at each level of wealth that are not available at the level prior to it. Now, it's no indictment on the level that comes before. It's simply to say, if you try and get answers from the people living in your scenario, you're going to get answers that keep you at that level of wealth. The answers are not to be found where you are. You have to import what I call extra scenario thinking that comes from the next level up. The simplest way to do that, and this is why we were discussing it earlier, is to read a great deal. And there are other means as well. It's things like coaching, mentoring, going on courses. It's being a sponge for knowledge and information. But the starting point is to look around you and to say, the answers that get me to the next level are not to be found at this level.
Well, you cite that whole crab in a bucket syndrome, where there's the one crab trying to get out of the bucket and the other crabs are sort of actually making it sort of fall back in.
Yes.
And I don't know what you do about that, other than maybe move on.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, and it does happen at every level of society as well. And in fact, you'll find that it tends to be split almost 50-50 and quite radically between groups of people. You'll either have those who are incredibly supportive of you and want to help you up, or you'll have people who are very bitter about your success and want to pull you down. It happens at every level of society. And I cover this, I try to write about this very gently in my book, but just to sort of give a nudge in this direction, which says, if you are living within a family grouping, a society, whatever the case might be, that is particularly bitter about your level of success, you may actually need to extricate yourself from that community of thinking before you can go up to the next level. And it's a difficult thing to say. I mean, I understand the full impact of what it is that I'm saying there. But in certain situations, you actually may need to get away from people who are physically pulling you back down.
Yeah, and name-calling and all that.
Absolutely. And of course, the horrible thing is, once you become successful, it's astonishing how much they love you. But, you know, it does happen.
Yeah, so break those ties. If you had to... I mean, who have you actually written this book for? Who do you see as your readership, just in the last couple of minutes that we've
Tamara,
got here, Douglas?
This really is a book I wish I could have given to myself 10 years ago. And I primarily think of it as being for the person who is really just beginning their career, because there are so many traps we can fall into, so many mistakes we can make that will dampen our wealth potential as the years go by. And it's incredible how simple the answers actually are, but we don't know them. So if I could go back in time 10 years and give this book to myself, I reckon I would have cut a massive swathe off my learning curve. I tend to look at this book as written really for three demographics, and two of them more than the third. The first one, and this is the primary readership that it's aimed at, is the young man or woman starting off in their career. The second one is the parent raising a child, because I talk about some of the ways we influence children to think about wealth, and I think it's incredibly important that we do it the right way. And the third one is for the business owner, owner. And that's at, as I say, various levels of success. Even if you are a wealthy business owner, it then says, how do you add an additional 0 to your annual revenue? How do you get from where you are to the next level up?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. The book is called Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? It's by Douglas Kruger, who I've been chatting to. It is published by Penguin Books South Africa, and it's 50 Ways the Rich Think Differently. Thank you so much. It's been so interesting.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.